Good evening on this Saturday, the 24th of December. This is your 28storms.com cyclone update. Of course, it is Christmas Eve, but we are still dealing with that tropical low that is plaguing much of the Northern Territory coastline. The U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center has issued a tropical cyclone formation alert as a result of the system showing some additional signs of strengthening within the last 12 to 24 hours. The following is the second most recent Bureau of Meteorology track forecast. As we can see, this track had the system passing just to the east of the Tiwi Islands while developing into a Category 2 cyclone before making a landfall somewhere near Point Stewart. And as we fast forward to the forecast that was posted at 5 p.m. local time, Darwin and Dundee Beach have been included within the cyclone warning, but notice that the overall track has not changed. They are simply adding Darwin and surrounding areas within that warning in the event that the gale force winds do spread a little bit more toward the west than anticipated, but again, the overall track remains unchanged. The latest radar mosaic, courtesy of the weatherchaser.com, confirms the overall position of where the Bureau of Meteorology had the developing tropical low. As we can see, there is quite a definite circulation swirling about just to the northwest of the Cobourg Peninsula, but the overall motion appears to be nearly stationary. Meanwhile, the latest daytime visible satellite animation shows that this surface low has become much better defined compared to this time yesterday, but one negating factor that becomes very obvious when switching over to the enhanced infrared is the fact that we still are dealing with quite a lot of easterly wind shear. As you will see, the overall center of the storm, confirmed by radar and visible, is located in this general region, but notice that once convection begins to blossom over the center, it gets shunted off quickly toward the west, and that is just another indicator that the wind shear has not abated just yet. And the water vapor does show a fairly healthy outflow pattern along the northern and western semicircles of the developing disturbance, but toward the south and east, we see that there is a definite restriction in the convection and outflow, and that is a result of, once again, the wind shear and some land interaction. As we switch over to the latest products from the University of Wisconsin, we see that the vorticity max associated with the disturbance has strengthened, although it is partially over land, and the wind shear values indicate that the favorable upper level ridge is not 100% vertically stacked over the developing tropical low. It is centered somewhat more so over the Northern Territory, and this is also shown by the color graphic. The most favorable winds are located just to the south of the cyclone center, or developing cyclone center, and we have those easterly winds that have been rather persistent just toward the north in the Arafura Sea. Overall, this is a fairly small upper level ridge, so any deviation in the upper level pattern can completely reverse the opportunistic chances of increased or decreased tropical development, and that is just something we will have to continue to monitor. But as of right now, the models continue to insist that upper level conditions will gradually become more favorable and that the system will strengthen as long as the center can remain just off the coast. This is a quick look at the latest 0Z run of the GFS and its vertical shear forecast. The initial time frame shows the upper level ridge sitting over and just toward the south of the developing tropical low, and over the next 48 to 72 hours you will notice that the model is beginning to increase or expand the upper level ridge more so over the open waters of the Arafura and eventually into the Gulf of Carpentaria. So it looks as though this tropical low will not have any issue becoming at least a Category 2 cyclone as long as it stays over open waters, or at least if the majority of the center of circulation stays away from land. Now, the following graphic shows the current low to mid-level steering analysis, and there are two dominant weather systems that are going to greatly dictate where this tropical cyclone or potentially developing cyclone will make landfall. First, we have this persistent ridge that has been dominating the weather pattern over Western Australia for at least the past week, and we are seeing much more in the way of troughiness that is working its way into Queensland and into the Coral Sea. Now, some of the latest dynamical model guidance is continuing to weaken the eastern periphery of this Western Australian ridge, which will allow for much more in the way of troughing to set up over the eastern portion of the country, and more troughing would have the tendency to steer our developing system more toward the east in the general direction of the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Cape York Peninsula. Unfortunately, even if this more easterly solution does verify, it looks as though residents along the Northern Territory coast between Darwin and Gove are going to have to deal with this developing disturbance for at least an additional 48 to 72 hours, as the steering currents in the short term are expected to remain weak. But we can also make out the mid-level steering pattern based on the following water vapor animation. You can see the anticyclonic flow over Western Australia, with more in the way of troughiness over Queensland, and over time we will see more in the way of troughiness beginning to set up over the central part of the country, and this ridge is going to slowly push more toward the northwest into the southeast Indian Ocean, and this type of pattern would support this tropical system moving more toward the east-southeast. Now, as I say that, please keep in mind that this is an unofficial forecast. For official information, keep it tuned to the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, and you must also consider that this has been an extremely difficult tropical disturbance to get a handle on. It has defied all forecasters up to this point, but as of right now, I am fairly confident that this tropical cyclone will develop and push more so into the Gulf and Cape York Peninsula, but not until this system has already probably caused some minor flooding problems, especially near the Northern Territory coast. So as we turn to the latest dynamical model forecast, beginning with the 0Z run of the GFS, this model has been sticking with its guns with a more easterly track for the past several days, and the latest run does take the area of low pressure more so into the Northern Territory coast just to the west of Gove and to the east of Darwin, but it is making landfall nonetheless over the Northern Territory, so gusty winds and some heavy rainfall and potential flooding will be major concerns over the next 2 to 3 days, but in the medium range we very well could be on the lookout for some re-strengthening or additional development in the Gulf of Carpentaria, depending on whether or not it makes it into the open waters, and then it begins to push more so toward the east, so interests along the northern coast of Queensland should also be paying close attention to this system in the event that this forecast does verify. Overall, the GFS accumulated precipitation forecast for the next 5 days does highlight the risk of heavy rainfall. As we can see, the model is depicting in upwards of 10 to 14 inches, especially over portions of the Northern Territory, and this amounts to roughly 300 millimeters of precipitation. Furthermore, we do still have some rather good model consistency between the GFS and ECMWF models. The following is the ECMWF run, and as we go into day 1 and day 2, we don't see much in the way of any significant movement, with the tropical low still being nearly stationary. The same can be said by day 3, but it is drifting more toward the south into the Northern Territory, but not by much. And then by day 4 and day 5, the easterly track is well underway, with re-strengthening definitely occurring over the Gulf before making landfall in the Cape York Peninsula. Meanwhile, the European ensemble members also appear to be in general agreement with this idea, although they appear to be even slower with the overall movement, and they don't show the system being directly over the Gulf until day 6. And the last thing I will show with respect to the ECMWF model is the 500 HPA level forecast, and this is the main steering layer once again. At the 0 hour, we see that the mid-level ridge is still holding steady over Western Australia, with the main troughiness being situated just off the coast of Queensland. But as we go into day 1, 2, and especially day 3, this ridge is shifting more so into the open waters of the Indian Ocean while weakening, and this is going to set up the pattern for more troughiness coming out of the Bight of Australia and then spreading more toward the northeast, which will then allow for our cyclone to turn more toward the Gulf. Also, if we return to the GFS for just a moment, this model is showing the same general setup. There again is the ridge, and as we go into the next 48 to 72 hours, that ridge moves more toward the northwest, and we have much more troughiness coming across, and that is allowing for the storm to make that turn back toward Queensland. And finally, this is the latest run from the Canadian CMC model. This model shows the storm drifting about over the Northern Territory near the coast for the next 48 to 72 hours, followed up by a turn more toward the east with a lot of re-strengthening and perhaps even additional strengthening over the Gulf before making a second landfall. So just to summarize, interest in and surrounding the city of Darwin should still definitely be paying attention to the system and official updates from the Bureau of Meteorology. You are under a cyclone warning, and there is the chance that you could get gale force winds and heavy rainfall, especially as that center of circulation continues to drift and change direction ever so slightly due to the poor current steering winds. And a more easterly shift in the track is not really expected for at least another 2 to 3 days, but once it does, it will more than likely be after already making landfall near the Northern Territory coast before then shifting into the Gulf and threatening places further toward the east. So thanks again for viewing updates from 28 Storms. Go ahead and check out 28storms.com/cyclone along with our Australian Twitter account, that is at 28 Cyclones, for more frequent updates throughout the remainder of this developing system.